the agenda here. We're going to do a quick introduction. Did that. My name's Tim. We're going to talk about the use cases for a form builder. Then we're going to dive right into the overall architecture, since it's fairly complex. Process overview of how the forms themselves get created, from this template definition to getting the response, and then how the users would respond to them and answer the questions and collect all of the data. And then we're going to go dive into the code and do an implementation review before doing some staged question and answer. If you guys have any question like throughout the process, feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind being asked questions. This is more for you guys, and it is fairly complicated. So please ask any questions that you might have. So for the form builder, our concept that we had, we had a business problem. We needed to create basically any sorts of forms that people would be asking. Our inspiration was kind of whether it's doing market research or site surveys. We had some clients that wanted to create pretty much any size, shape, form that they wanted to ask their users. So we've used this current application in a virtual healthcare app with patients coming in and doing everything from kind of HIPAA compliance background to actually answering their full like family medical history. And you can see that those two types of forms have very different sorts of requirements. One is kind of like a simple waiver, and then another one might be a very like advanced form with a lot of questions, and something going very in depth around someone's like medical history, for instance. Here's a couple other example or like things that I thought up off the top of my head. You know, if you're doing marketing engagement, if you were doing market research around, you know, there's this new product, like an iPhone 14 that we're giving away today. Like what type of features do you like about the iPhone 14? Do you like its like triple camera thing or the dynamic island? You know, how do you feel about that? That would be a kind of use case. Satisfaction survey after something like one of these meetings. How interesting was I on a scale of 1 to 5 or 5 to 5? That would be another instance where you could use this. Application screening, party RSVPs, site surveys, you know, any sort of interaction where you have someone posing questions and then having someone answer them. That would kind of be the use case when you would need this type of form in an application. So and because when we reviewed the kind of the various needs of forms, we needed to come up with an idea and a concept of creating a form definition and then making it customizable enough for the user to be able to ask any sorts of questions that they wanted. So I'm just going to dive into the demo here, and I'm going to start by going over the architecture that we're using. So let me switch tabs here. Well, actually, I'm going to show, before I do the architecture, I'm going to show an instance of our form builder so you can kind of like anchor what we're talking about in our head. So we've got basically just a list of forms here, and then our form constructor is right here. And then we have, it has a title, a little description, and then a collection of different question types out here. We'll dive more into these a little bit later, but I just wanted to show you a preview of like the different types that we have, some multiple choice, a user signature. which shows up more in the preview. And then there's like an image uploader. We also have multiple sections. And then we can preview it over here where we would just kind of fill this out here. I'm from Denver, so Coors is a little bit better. Actually, hold on. Yeah, I'll write this down like Tim, and then we can add a photo if we wanted to. So this is like what we wanted to do. We had a collection of questions, various input types, various sections, and then we wanted to be able to submit this. Our inspiration for this application was Google Forms, which is a very similar sort of implementation, but we wanted to anchor the data structure within OutSystems so that we can capture it at the time of capture, that all the data would be, we wouldn't have to write an integration. We as you're filling this out, this is anchored in like the OutSystems database. So the architecture for this, this is our Figma for it. And basically how we start with it is, I'm going to start up here in this top right section. So we've got kind of these, think of like a Russian nesting doll of structures here. So we've got the base form on the left here that will hold different form sections, which are essentially the pages of the form. You know, this first section right here, and then this second section. They're kind of controlled and edited up the top here. And then within those form sections or pages, we have what's called a form field. And the form field is basically the questions that we are asking the user. And it's important to keep that like form field kind of in mind, because we use it as the prefix for all of these different types to kind of classify these different types. So we'll have a collection of form field questions of various question types, and that is this purple region right here. So we've got a free input, a static text, which is basically like a text blocks. We have static text listed here twice, but let's say this was image load. So yeah, we'll have like an image upload type, and then we have a multi-select here at the bottom. The multi-select is a little bit more complex because we have to define the different options that you are selecting down here at the bottom. So this whole structure right here is the form, let's say, definition. And as we go through and once we do the data definition, the way that we present it on the page is we'll instantiate the form initially, which gets this top section. We'll add a section which updates it. All of these are basically writes to the database. So, and then once we get into the questions, there's a switch case that for the different form types to define what sort of question type it is. And then if it is multi-select, it has multiple options that are tied to that thus far. Any questions on that thus far? I can show you a database, an entity diagram as well for it. I think I have one. Let me see if I can share Service Studio so I can show you the entity. entity diagram here. Bear with me when it pulls up. Okay, I did. I'll have to stick in here though. So basically it's Russian nesting dolls for the different form options. And this is how we highlight, or we create the form definition, which is shown on this, like visually through this form editor. And then, so we've got the form on the outside, the definition, and then the different question types, which include all of these purple sections here. So we've got a static text, which would be this one at the top, this welcome to the form builder demo. The next one would be a text input right here, followed by multiple select. And then we have something called a data value type question type, which is, these are data value, they're disabled input types, but they are pre-filled with data that we pull from the database entities. So we'll have like a prompt, and then we basically use the OutSystems entity model to pull in and pre-fill information from the database. So whether that's like a location name, these are all of the instances of what we would pull in into the form based on like let's say we have you're doing a site survey at like a Starbucks or something. So you could pull in we'd make a reference to the location and its name within the database. And then we would pre-fill it like a single input with that data. So that's what the data value one is. Our signature block is presented down here, and we saw in our preview that has a preview. It has that sign-on glass functionality, and then we have what's called an image uploader, which is this a prompt to upload an image down here at the bottom. So this is the form like definition builder. You can see that I've used these sort of settings to be able to customize the different details and entity properties of these different types. So for instance, the single input has two different display presentation methods along with a question that gets written to the database. And then we can have either a single line or like a paragraph, as well as required or non-required fields. So we hit save. It'll go reference a specific form field for that free input, and then make an update to the database for that form field. Another pretty nice feature that we have is this drag and drop move around with these icons, or the hamburger icon. You can kind of, or you can reorder the questions as you go along, as well as remove them if they are if you don't need them anymore. We have the same sort of reordering with this page editor in terms of page 1, page 2, and you can add a third one if you wanted from there. So that's the overview of all of the form kind of types. And then for like the form definition. So this is kind of like your saved file, definition type. So you would do this to create your site survey or your party RSVP or that sort of. This is the form definition type. So any questions on the structure or the at this time. Okay, cool. So now we get a little bit more complicated here. So right now we've only been talking about the form definition, kind of the form template. And in order to get the form preview, we've created another data structure that basically inherits all of these this data and these entities, and then creates a copy of it in what we call a form response. So the form response this is just a generic, this is a form, and then we have a form kind of response. So we'll take all of the data that we started with at the beginning. We're going to create, we're going to use a method which is called this generate response from form, and then we create basically a form response. I call this the print method. So if you if you opened up like a Word document for a job application form, and then you open that up, you open the form definition, and then if you were to fill it out on paper, you'd hit the print method, and then you'd get basically a blank copy of that form. And you could do that for however many people are applying for that job. And then as the user fills that out, if you were just writing in your name and all of that, we add more data into the form response fields so that we can basically customize that instance of the form, and that is the form response. So each of these have a little bit more. There's more data properties on the entities, and that's why they have this FRF or form response field instead of the form field, to differentiate those two entities. So when you fill out the free input here at the top, that gets updated in the database and gets written into the specific form response field tied to that free input. And then we reference that form response throughout the application. And the same thing goes for static text. Doesn't have any more specific data tied to it, because it's just just the static text right here. But then if we had, the image uploader, we would be able to upload the particular image that's tied to that particular form response. As well as coming down to the multiple choice, the multiple select options would have, which one, it would have all of the options, and then there's different fields as to whether or not they've been selected or not. There's also some validation that's happening in this particular layer. We've got some just custom JavaScript listening to these questions and then updating this progress widget here to showcase how the progress that the user has made on the form. So any questions there? I'm gonna talk a little bit about how this print method works in a second though, and then we'll look at the code after that.
Hey Tim, I got a quick, maybe just as an overview, and you might be speaking to it at some point. So I think the strategy behind this form response, and maybe I don't want to step on or rain on your parade, but that's fine. From a high level, I think the strategy was that what was the condition when you're making modifications when you're building a form, right? So we wanted to be able to implement point in time, right? I think what Tim was representing was the ability to create a form, right? And that form is now valid. And then the question is, what if the form changes?
Mhm.
It's not an issue in this design because these forms, like Tim had said, or like if you think of the time when you print on a form on response, it's what that form builder looked like at that point in time. So if somebody was working on a form, and an administrator came in and they changed the form, it would have no impact on the person that was working on the form because it's a snapshot at point in time. So we did think about what would be the impact because this is being used in the real world, right? So it's like, what would be the impact if somebody's going into the form builder like a healthcare and they were making
Mhm.
modifications to like a HIPAA form, right? We did not want it to impact the current forms that were already being filled out. So with this design that Tim's outlining, we're able to basically snapshot the form builder at that point in time, and that's the reference that's held for the form for the lifetime of that form. So that
Mhm.
eliminates that eliminates which one of our core concerns would be breaking changes, right, on a dynamic
Yeah.
form. What and so I think I you may be speaking to that. Didn't mean to step on anything, but I think that's
No,
a pretty
that's
good high.
that's that's a great point, Peter. So, and yeah, I think I can highlight that a little bit more right now. Thanks for bringing that
Sure,
back
sure.
up. So yeah, so the reason in the design that we have, um, like Peter was just mentioning, is that we have kind of like this the architecture where we take all of the data here and then put it over here. While it is kind of a lot, but we don't have to manage different versions of different form and like over time we don't there's no tracking. It's like Peter was just saying, when you generate the form response, it's a snapshot of that whole form at the time. So if I go back to my editor here, and we've got, I updated this question to say what's my favorite color, and then here we can just say that, you know, if I wanted to update this, and then if I generate the preview here, what it does is it runs through this this method to create a form response. So if I go back here, you'll notice that the ID right here is 669, and it's got the most updated fields here. But if I go back and then I change it again to change the questions and the question type, when I generate that preview again, it goes through, prints a new, prints a new form response, and then it takes all of the field. So you'll have at the instantiation point, or like the print method point, you'll have the most up-to-date data at all times. And when you're submitting, this is just a previewer, but if you were submitting this within an application, we would have safe of form response 669, form response 670, form response, 1 or 2. So the data model is, and the integrity of that data model is intact, with this sort of kind of like snapshot instantiation and then extension. Does that kind of capture what you were mentioning, Peter? That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, it does, right? Because it's important to know that you have a the referential integrity, right, of the data model at the point in time when the individual was filling the form out. So it allows us to basically, as an administrator, if they were working on the form builder, right, as an admin and making changes, it won't break anybody that's currently working because they're, to what Tim had mentioned, that these forms are basically point in time. So anytime a form is created, that form holds that point in time value of all the fields. So that was kind of one of our important steps on our implementation, that make it flexible enough that we could think of the not only the happy path, but the path when things change, right? Because forms over time could potentially change, right? Especially since these forms were designed for the customer in mind, and every customer might have a different look on the form, and over time they may change, right? So we wanted to make sure that they could use the forms, and as the administrator they could change the forms, but the forms that were live would not break, right? They would be, like to Tim's point, printed point in time forms. So that uh pretty, I think Tim, you spot on that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks, Peter. Um, so let's go into I'm going to talk about the UI because I think it'll help do. Actually, I'll talk about the form response generation. So this is the print method for that form response, and then I'll showcase how the UI is kind of set up here. So when on the generation of the form response, we'll take it's kind of, we've got like a swim lane diagram here. So we'll run this top form runs. We take the form definition, we generate the form response, and then it goes through a for each of the sections here, and then writes to the database. Each one of these will all the green writes to the database. So we'll generate the form response, which is right here. And then we do a for each. It's basically a bunch of like nested for eaches as we walk down the chain here. So we'll do for each form section. We'll generate the form response sections based on the data from the associated form response section. Then within the form response section, we'll say, okay, how many questions are there? Let's say there's 4 here. And then we'll look at each of those form response sections, and then we'll generate a form response field based on the particular type. And by doing that, we've run a switch case on the form field type, which is all of our different question types. Is this a static text? No, it's a text input. What type of question am I when creating this form response question? We'll look it up within the database to get the correct form response instance, and then generate the form response field and the form response field like options here. So then, so at that point, we're down here at this chain. And then if it's a multiple select, we'll kind of do the same for each down at the bottom. So then we'll have, let's say that's question 1, we'll come back up around, go back to whatever question 2 is. Okay, this one is a static text. We will go through, it's a form response field. What type is it? Let's grab the definition from the database, and then write the form response field of that type back in the database. And you basically go through and do this for each for all of the questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the top. And then it'll come back around. Okay, I'm done with that section. We'll go back up and then look at what are the questions on section 2. And then basically do that same process again. We've got a static text at the top, and then the like a text input right after that. So that's the basic flow of how the responses gets generated down there. Form to section to questions on the section to a switch case on the form response field. And basically, if we think about that, the UI presentation is very similar to how this print method is working. So up here on the left, this is the page layout here. So we've got the form itself in this gray box. Whoops, sorry. In this gray box along the outside. And then we've got the sections that are listed right here in the section display. And then within the section, there is a list item for each of the form fields here, these green boxes. So we'll list out all of those questions, the 6 different questions. And then within each of those questions, there is a switch case that looks at the definition of the form field and says, okay, based on the type, what sort of UI am I going to present back to the user? If it's a static text block, it'll look kind of like this with just words on a page, HTML on a page. Okay, this next form field 2 here, we hit the switch case. Oh, this is a multiple select block. This has multiple select options. So it goes through, it says what type is this, and then we'll present that and then have a like a list item for each of those options to present. And then we'll keep going down, and then just have the same, this is kind of the generic philosophy of it. Whether it's image or image uploader, the switch case is pretty much the key method or the key part to present the UI. It also allows us to add more question types, more complex ones. If we wanted to add some dynamic sort of question types, like you check a box and then it has more more content or more questions like nested under that, you would add another question type to the switch case. And that's what is happening here. So we've got the form fields being listed here. This is a static text. It has this sort of component, and this is like the editor of that particular form field type. Then this next one would be the text input, and it just goes through that switch case all the way down. Does that make sense to everybody? Is there any questions on that? If there's not, I'm going to go into
I would say one thing, Tim, just so from a high level for people looking at it, and I think so you think about the presentation layer with from OutSystems point of view with blocks, right? So it's whether that block supports that type, right? So literally a lot of the feature sets we built are based on top of the widgets, right, that come out of the box from OutSystems, but we're now driving them through. We're factoring them through, right, this switch case to present the core widgets, and then maybe in some cases enhancing them, right, so we can give them additional functionality. So this allows us to build out what I would say right now we show 4 or 5 different widgets on the screen, like for text input, or maybe an option box with radio buttons. So anything that OutSystems generates, we're trying to leverage. We're not writing, at least right now, we're not writing, and you can correct me, Tim, we're not writing anything that's specifically custom. We could, but the idea is to leverage the low code, and all of these should look familiar to them, because at the very root, these are all OutSystems widgets. We've just built a data model around it so we could build this dynamic content on the output side.
Yeah, I think we, at its foundation, like these are checkboxes, and this is the radio group, and this is the multi-select radio group, and this is the dropdown. That's like where we started, right? And then we did add more things on top of that, like like this particular option type has a checkbox inside of it. And that's just some of the complexity that we've added on top of the OutSystems widget. So we have we have added some complexity, but at its baseline, like this drop down right here is going to be the the OutSystems drop down, and then when we go through the switch case of the in both the presentation layer as well as the what information we structured the type to be within the database, we're basing that on the OutSystems UI dropdown. What data type does it need? It needs that like dropdown option, I believe, with like an ID and a value. And when we're creating the definition of that form field, we're at the most foundational level, we're providing a list of options and transforming what is being entered here into those drop-down options, so it'll present back to the user, and we can leverage the platform, so we're not writing our own like drop-down items or input kind of options. We're running a lot of stuff on top of that, but yeah, at its core, it's that's a drop-down type, and this is like an input versus a whatever the paragraph one is called. Cool. Anybody else? If not, we'll just hop into Service Studio.
I don't know if you are reading the question. Sorry, I'm Elena. Are you listening?
Yes. Okay. Yep.
I have a doubt about dependent answers and questions when you in dynamic formularies. If you have one kind of a flow dependent on the answer of one question that you had before. How do you handle this?
Okay, so if I'm understanding this right, are you asking about the validation or the?
No, when you create the form.
Okay.
To have a dynamic form, for instance, if in question one you answer true or false, question 3 or 4 can appear or not, or can have different values depending on what you have seen before.
Great question. So you're asking about the dynamic form. So if we don't currently have that capability. So, if I picked this option here and I picked cores, the questions below it might be related to cores. That would be like the dynamic kind of selection or dynamic questions based on the answers to previous questions. So the what we have right now doesn't necessarily support that at the time because of the kind of the isolated nature of these question types. So this form field, this question doesn't know anything about this one up here. They're just kind of entries in the database, and they don't know like that they live in this form section. They're just kind of referenced by IDs. I think if we wanted to create that sort of dynamic content, I think what we would do is add another form field or question type with that sort of capability. So let's say if we added another one of these options that was dynamic content, and then we had, let me just try to live do this right here. So, it'd be like a dynamic form field, and then, you could have like a tree sort of option where, if it was a true false, you could load different different options underneath of it. So basically, this dynamic form field would be one of those options within the switch case, and then maybe it would if it was a true false, you do a Boolean kind of presentation based on like the answer, the response to it. And then you would either be add an if to do the true case and then the false case. This would get pretty challenging to implement because it would get pretty specific to what you wanted to do within. You could get really complex with the presentation and then kind of managing this. So if you had, it would depend on what you would want to ask after that. So if this top section could be like the yes, no, and then the bottom section, I think what you would want to do, you basically have to add, you'd have to add like another switch case at the bottom to what you wanted to do, similar to sort of this multi-select, but it would be like another part of the tree where you would list out kind of what was under that true case. But if you were, you could have the comments, let's say you just knew what you wanted to kind of hard code your two options, you could probably do it with this, let's say it's a specific question type. Do you like cars? And then if you were interested in what your favorite one was, or, your favorite car. And then you could say, why not, or something like that. But the more you kind of try to do this sort of nesting within these lower parts, the more complicated it's going to be, and kind of the updates associated with that. So we haven't done yet. The idea has come up, and we've decided that this sort of complexity is a little bit too much. What you could do, though, is if you didn't want to do this dynamic sort of presentation, is you could structure your form, do something similar where it's like, if instead of having this sort of tree with the dynamic content, you could ask this question first, and then you could say, if liked cars, what's your favorite? In the prompt, you could kind of do this sort of you can add these like 3 questions in a row to the form here to kind of get you maybe not the best, maybe not this really nice dynamic user experience, but you could get the data that you would want. Does that answer your question?
More or less, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Tim, I would add to that as well, right? So what I would say is that, and I think Tim was touching on, was that depending on the use case, I would say we could build a nested widget, right? Something that's a complex widget. It really falls outside our initial design, but the data model could be modified, right, to support, let's say, a custom widget that really had met the specific needs that we needed for a particular line of business, right? So I think what I'm trying to point out is that we're not locked into a specific design that says we can't complete it. We just haven't had a use case right now that fits that specific question. At least I haven't, right? But I think the way we're designed, Tim, we could we could build out a complex widget, right? That would enable those type of that type of functionality. We would just have to think through it, right? What would be the easiest way to implement it, right? How to encapsulate it effectively so we can stay within our containment model. But anyway, that's
Mhm.
what I would throw out at this point. Just my feedback.
Yeah, I think you would add, this is the dynamic one. And then what I think you would do is, oops, didn't mean to move that. Is you would do basically like that, like you would add another layer based on the answers. You would say, if it's this Boolean case, you could add more questions, and then you'd have this other kind of like, you'd add another switch case within that particular question type that would have your content that you wanted to add on to. And yeah, we haven't had this particular case yet, but it's definitely like a valid use case, that some of these other kind of like specialized form building applications would have. But yeah, great question. I'm gonna leave that up there. We can brainstorm that later. Okay, I'm gonna switch the screen share to see if I can pull up Service Studio so we can actually see see the implementation of the form builder. For some reason, I can't do my entire screen, so I can't go back and forth between kind of the two windows. But I'll try my best to kind of showcase Service Studio and keep talking through the implementation here. So let's see. So we've got. So this is Service Studio. This is our form builder kind of encapsulated application. We've got it split up into the core services right here, the business layer that sits on top of that. Then we have the forms core widgets, which houses like all the UI and the question types. And then the portal sits on the very top and is the sort of the application end user entry point for the app. Down here, we've got the service. It's called a service core widget. We were tying these to like particular tickets. So if you were tying like a task to a form, that's what this is down here, if you're wondering. So from within the forms portal, I'm going to go straight to the into the core widgets because most of this is just a well, I'll just show. So here's the form builder itself. This is the list of forms that we saw at the very beginning, and then if we went to the magic is happening. So open this shared block here in my other module. And then we have, going back to that, this is the whole form around the outside here with the title and the description. And then this interior section has the section viewer, which has all of the questions. So we're kind of walking the tree again to get down to the most specific things, and then using sort of like expressions or like a switch case to go over it. So if we go, oops, sorry, I meant to click go into the section editor. We've got our question types up at the top. All of these have click events to add these sections. And then we have this top section is like a help area, which has all of the information. And then this bottom section is what's called the form field list item, which is, this is where the switch case is. So this list item basically has, it takes in a form, particular type, ID, a display type, and then whether or not it's mandatory, and then it's tied upwards to a particular section, And then you can see down here, we've got all of these other form field types where during the switch case kind of presentation process, it'll look at the type of the form field from the input and then reference one of these blocks. So if we looked at, the static text here, we're using this HTML editor to do the static text. And then we have when you click the options, it displays this pop-up where you edit the actual data. So that one is a good example because of but this one is the user input. So it just has like the prompt, just a display type, and then this is the information that is tied form field settings for the user input. So each of these like question types have their own associated basically display for the user input, where it mirrors the data model, and then it controls what the definition is upon save. So let me go back to the section viewer here. Oops, sorry. Okay, yeah. Here's all the list items. So as we go through, we're doing an aggregate to get the form fields by section ID. We use the particular section from the parent. If it's form X and then section 1, and then we do an aggregate to pull those lists, and then use a list item to display them all down here. I'm going to go now to the response viewer because it has it has the switch case that I wanted to highlight. So this is the form definition, and then if we go into the response, pretty similar sort of layout. We've got this is the top level for the response. It's got that progress.
Section titles on the left, and then in the section viewer.
Yeah, the section viewer here. This is where
a lot of debugging information right here, because we're trying to get the counts, and the validation has been pretty challenging to implement. A lot of that is so the section viewer.
Block, which is the switch case. So if we pull this up, this has all of the question types that we've created thus far. So as it goes down, we have this like structured if statement. It's probably not the best implementation, but basically if the form type is a static text, then we're going to display this top one, and then take a response field editor for the static text. So it'll just this particular block, which is just the HTML editor that will display. So then it so yeah, it's the false case. To the next one,
signature block, and kind of so on and so forth down the
line. So if we looked up the signature, I'm trying to get to the one of the more simple cases with the this one is multiple select. We probably could have read a little bit easier. So okay, so this one is the free input. That one's kind of more straightforward. So for this response form editor for the user input, it'll take in a particular form response field with its own ID. It's got the response section ID, the form field type, which is a form field type identifier, and then the display type. So have their own form field type. This one it would be like user input, and then it's got its own display type, whether it's like the paragraph or the one-line user input. Then we have a is mandatory field, a is this valid field, and this is where we handle the the required fields and the progress field, and then a last update. So this response field will take in, or it takes in the response field, and then it updates the particular data type or the variable based on the information that comes through, and then presents it back to the user. We're doing some custom JavaScript for the validation, because, and you can kind of see where the event listeners live. And the reason for that is because of like the nested sort of structure with and the dynamic nature of these inputs, we had to track the validation for each of these locally within the application, because we didn't have access to certain widgets because of the customization. We didn't have access to the widgets like built-in validation flags. So we actually had to add some custom JavaScript to track those.
A little bit of a drawback. We do have a lot of scripting that is being added on top of this. But if you keep the form lengths of a section
limited to, let's say, 25 questions or so, then then it works pretty well. Otherwise, you start getting some performance issues. So I can kind of show you what one of these looks like. So we basically just add a validation function to the input, to each of these inputs. And then the validation function will basically checks to see if it's filled out and mandatory. And then it does an update to see if it's been clicked or not. So we go through these different use cases here. We do have sorry, let me back out here. Because of the complexity and the kind of the sheer amount of different options. See, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these response types. Testing this has been pretty challenging due to the complexity and kind of the natures that each one of these sort of validations method that's been created. So, but it's been a pretty challenging and satisfying process to get as far as we have had thus far. So let me come back up to the response viewer. So yeah, here's where the switch case is, but you can see how the form viewer or the section viewer and the form response viewer have like they're paralleled structures in both the their architecture as well as their UI implementation. Other examples that we have up here that I could go into is that for the multiple select, you can see that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these different options. And these are those last tail, the rightmost elements within that architecture diagram. So based on the different type, these will all have their own sort of display types here. So, you know, we've got a checkbox option here to see if it's this actual. You can actually select these and then enter in more like the other option. Have different values for that. But it'll go through and do a list of the selected options and then list them out. And then if any of those have this kind of this other check, we'll list them out here. And then it's very, very similar in terms of this option inline. There's this is the radio group right here. The drop down is just a list of, you know, drop down options with the value and the order that is provided. And then the multiple choice is just a vertical multiple choice, which is from our form. And then we've got some yes, no checkboxes as well. So that is also adds to a lot of the complexity and has been a challenge to sort of validate throughout this process here. If we wanted to look at the sort of the data structure for this, let me open this in the CS module. Here I can show you the data structure right here. So for the forms here, we've got, let me move this. I'm stuck in like Figma land. I'm trying to hit H and move things around. But you can see here the properties that we've got the form template themselves. So we've got title, description, active. This preview ID at the bottom is actually a form response, and that's the preview that we were seeing in the app when I was demoing it earlier. The preview ID is itself its own, like a known form response, and every time we were opening it or like making edits, it updates that with the most up-to-date version. So it takes the snapshot and then rewrites a form response for that. And this would be separate from, this way it's the same data structure as the form responses, but it's tied back to the form because it's like kind of its own snapshot. So then we've got the service types up here. This is like the tickets that we were tied to. We didn't really go into any of that, but basically if the concept was to have, you know, if you were doing an activity like a site survey, we could call it versus a job interview, there would be forms tied to that, and these different service types would you know, show you highlight which forms you need to fill out. This bottom part has, you know, the form section, ID title, the associated form ID is the foreign key. Then it comes down into the form field, which has sort of the switch case sort of method here. So it's got the section ID that it's tied to, these different form field types, and then and then it goes through, and all of these like tails of this have their own sort of definition property. So like static text is just a text. The form, you can see that these are all, most of these main ones are extension tables. So they just reference that particular form field ID, and then based on the type that's down here, add the specific, the data that's to that question type. So like for the input, the one that you have to enter, like your comments or your name, it'll have the prompt, which is the question, if it's disabled or not. And then this dynamic pool is like a reference option here. And because this is just the form field, we don't have a spot for the input. In the response, if we go down to the response, we've mirrored this this whole diagram. And if we went into the response, we have the form response field right here, you know, the same setup at the top.
Here's the section.
Comes over to the form response field, and then this is the free input here. Same extension table for both of these. It's got the prompt, and then it'll has a spot for the response right here. So that's where we get into the difference between kind of the definition and the response, or the response itself. This one has the data that the user is interested in. So like, for instance, if we look at the multiple select, oops, sorry. Meant to go back to the diagram. So if we looked at the multiple select, we've got, you know, very similar in terms of like the question type itself here. We've got a prompt for the question. And then over here, this is where we define the actual definitions. We've got an ID for the selected, the option value to provide to like the dropdown, the order, and then the information. And this multiple select question ID is basically the available option, which is in a separate table. I could have pulled that onto here. I should do that, but then if we go back to the form response, we'll see, oops, sorry, wrong form response. We'll start here with the question. We have, it's of type multiple select. The question would be down here. And then in the form response, you know, it'll pull the different option and then basically have whether or not it's select or not. And this allow additional information is kind of that checkbox for the other option. And if that, you know, if they wanted the user to write in their own comments, they don't see the option presented, they check that box. And then this is where that value is stored. And I could keep going through kind of some more of these kind of question types, but it's all pretty similar, of like extension table, data on the form response, and then you needed to provide that. Like for instance, the signature would actually have like a signature reference point to a different table, along with like signed on. But it's all like extension table with different properties here. And I wanted to leave time for questions. That pretty much wraps up the implementation. I know it was a lot. It's a pretty complicated implementation, but does anybody have any questions about questions, concerns, or comments that they wanted to bring up for right now? Peter, do you think everything? Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I think you made a good point. Yeah, I think you made a good point. It is a pretty complicated leveraging of the OutSystems platform, right? Based on the data model, and a lot of deep thought with Ryan, myself, and Tim, because this was customer specific driven, right? It really is a question of need. I mean, if you, this really evolved by the fact that we wanted to not, we did not want to be involved with having to manage a series of forms that was static, right? These needed to be where I think a lot of these solutions are really driven by need, right? In this case, we see a pattern for reuse for across different businesses. So yeah, I think Tim, you did a good job because it's a pretty complicated strategy, and it just shows you the ability to leverage low code, right, and think outside of an initial OutSystems implementation where we're normally building and dragging and dropping and using the framework, right, to do like IntelliSense and I don't know if they rename things, but they used to be like IntelliWarp, where things would snap and build out. We needed to be able to become more flexible and at a higher level, even than what the platform delivered out of the box. But we still leveraged the low code to be able to build out this framework. So we think there'll be reuse patterns, and if you guys, anyone has any questions, I'm sure Tim's available, and we're available as well to assist as as a consulting company with this type of pattern. But yeah, that's all I had, Tim.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me just check the chat. I've been looking at, let's see, share the recording in a few days, survey builder, similar approach, sky's the limit. Yes, awesome. The question groups with dependencies. I think that is a very good point. That's one of the next things that we were kind of talking about going through. So let me look in here. Looking at the questions in the chat here, we've got any support for data types such as numeric and date time with masks and validation. That is a very good question. What I would do with that one is we haven't done any of the inputs sort of data validation. It's kind of just been required or not required. But where you would do it is if you would do it in the in that form response layer and build it within the validation method that we have. So the let's say the user input, you could build it into this validation method, which is being run as it is being entered, and then kind of check for the parameters. We haven't looked into harnessing, let's say, the OutSystems built-in sort of validation. Like if you had a time input type, it does some validation and it creates a custom block for time, or for like a calendar sort of option for. We haven't had the need specifically to do those types of questions, but that's where you would do it. If you were looking for validation, you do it in the kind of this validation layer on the specific input type. But I think if I was doing like a calendar or a time specific one, I would add a different question type to keep it sort of separate from these other ones, because these are mainly kind of like text input and data entry, and the needs for validation there would be pretty I think pretty specific. I think we answered the question about dependent question and answers, dynamic forms, answer the previous question, or for instance, you have the option. Okay, so for the option for other, we did kind of review that. I'll re-highlight that here. So let me share my screen here again. So if we go into this, the multiple selection question type here, we'll add a new choice for other, and then we have this can you write in kind of checkbox. So if we save that, and if you check, it looks like that didn't update. For some reason, let me add a new one. Okay, I think I fixed my form here, but that's why you don't live demo stuff. But what you would do is we have like a text input for the other, and then let me share switch to Service Studio again. So for the other, if we go back to the multiple, sorry, just trying to get back to where I was. Within the multiple select here, in the switch case, for these all have different types for the different presentations, whether it's like a vertical, horizontal, the checkbox, and that they're all listed here in this like stacked if statement. But if I come up to the alt, you can see here that we've got this option value here. So, and then this is referencing if in the multiple options we have, if it is selected and the current one, it has this Boolean, which is allow additional information, then it will enable this other input value, which is the extra, that particular option's form response, extra info dot value. So if I go back to the data model for the response here, we've got multi-select. Here's our multi-select like option. If that particular option, let's say it was the other, it's the last one down there. If that one is selected right here, the option value, said other, and if it had this, allow additional information Boolean right here, then when you write that one, and if that's picked, then it writes it has another extension table with the data. This is where you would store the answer to that. It's an extension table, so it has this same identifier as the multiple select option, and then it just has a space to put your text in here. So that's how you would handle that situation. Anybody else have any questions? If not, I'm just going to share my contact information. If you guys want to get in touch with me, this is where I'm at. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate everyone's participation. And yeah, be on the lookout for another Denver user group event coming in the fall. We'll probably do something social around Next Step. So yeah, appreciate everybody's participation and attendance today.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Everybody have a good day.
You too.
Thanks, Tim.